So just a few moments ago, Complexity made an official announcement that they were making changes to their CSGO lineup, and so I thought I would make a video to talk a little bit about the situation Complexity is in, where it seems to be headed, and also talking a little bit about now what happens with Roca, who is the player that is going to be eventually leaving the team from what reports say and from the Complexity's official announcement. Now, of course, in the announcement, they essentially announced that they were going to be bringing in a player by the name of Surreal, who is a player from the UK, a player I don't know a whole lot about, and I don't think there really is a lot of out there about him. I know he's played on maybe some like ESEA Premier level teams, some UK teams. You know, apparently people from the UK scene know him quite well. And say that he seems to be like an upcoming talent. He's a younger guy that people seem to think could be quite good. He definitely has good pug stats and stuff like that, and he's put up good numbers in some of those lower level, like semi-pro type matches, but there really isn't a whole lot of information about him. We haven't really seen him compete at a super serious professional level yet, and so it's kind of a mystery as to who Surreal is really going to be. And the same thing could have been said about Def when he was picked up by Complexity, when this team kind of got initially thrown together at the beginning of the year. And I'm sure that there has to be some type of connection here between Depth and how Surreal makes his way onto the team. I think they had played together before in the UK scene on a couple of teams. And so I'm sure that's the kind of the connection that was there. That's kind of the bridge between Complexity and Surreal that I'm sure was built there by Def. And so that's the change that they decided to come up with. Now, this announcement only comes a couple of days after people were saying, including Surreal himself on social media, including some of his former teammates, as well as what was being reported on HLTV.org, that he was going to be brought onto the team as a trial member. So similar to what they were doing with Whitmer, where they were going to try him out, see how it goes. They didn't want to make any, maybe full-time decisions because some of their recent ones hadn't gone so well yet. So they wanted to kind of test the waters a bit first. But it seems like they're now officially signing him full-time. It also seems like Whitmer has been signed full-time, as apparently he was saying that he was going to be moving to Texas, which is, I know, where Deft is living with, I believe, Warden. I guess that's where Surreal is going to be as well. So I guess you'll have 3 of the starting 5 living together in Texas, from what I understand. I'm not sure if it's in a team house or just wherever Warden lives or what have you. That seems to be the trend that's going on, is that they're moving these people into full-time positions and even moving some of the players into some type of team house. So I kind of wanted to start my discussion about this situation with Complexity by rewinding a little bit. I did do a video on Complexity when they first announced their earlier lineup, which featured the return of Fraud, as well as whenever they first brought Shinobi and Deft on board, as of course the only returning members were Roca and Sangsington, because of course Simphis and Automatic had left to go play on TSM, and Valens, who was also a part of that group, also left to go to TSM to be a coach, as well as, I guess, an in-game leader coach type role. And so they put that team together with Shinobi and Def and Sangsington, Roca, and Fraud right at the beginning, very end of 2015, right at the beginning of 2016. And of course, things didn't go so well with the team. I think right now they stand with a 4-16 record in the ESL Pro League. We've seen them play in various qualifiers where they haven't really been able to qualify for any of the DreamHack lands or anything like that they've tried to participate in. They didn't even get involved in the process with the North American minor or qualifying for the major, so that was out of the equation. I know they've also competed in a couple of the qualifiers for that CVO Gfinity event at the end of April. Never really made it very deep in any of those brackets either. So of course things haven't gone well. You've had some players individually play pretty well for the team as far as stats go, like Sangston and even Roca on some games has looked quite good. But things weren't going well. Fraud wasn't playing very well, even though he was, trying to, commit full time to playing CS and really make his first steps at trying to compete seriously in CSGO, because he had played a little bit in 2013 with, friends on this cultivation team that went to one ESEA LAN, which featured players like Warden and Storm. I think TM might have been on the team, maybe XP3. I think Moses came on after Fraud had already left, and they, became United 5. So he had played then, but it wasn't really that serious of a team at the time. In fact, they got invited to ESEA as a replacement team. They didn't even actually qualify. So it seemed like it was more of a casual team. And then he left pretty quickly after that to go pursue whatever it is that he was doing for a full-time career. And now all of a sudden, we're sitting here 3 years later, and he tries to make this return to CSGO. And this kind of came after he did this Reflections episode with Thorn, where at the very end of that Reflection episode, he was talking about wanting to make a comeback. And it was soon afterwards that Complexity said they were going to try to bring him back and see if they couldn't make a run See if they couldn't, get some fire back on the team, bring somebody who has a lot of passion, a lot of experience, and someone that they hoped might be able to have an impact with the odd. Maybe not nearly as much of the impact that he had when he was a star player for North America in the glory days of CS 1.6, but someone that was going to be able to provide some firepower to the team as well as some experience and leadership. Well, obviously that didn't work out. The numbers weren't good for him. There was even a lot of things leaked about how people weren't getting along with Fraud or didn't really like having him on the team. Maybe that's a little bit blown out of proportion. Maybe people took that out of context a little bit too much. Maybe actually there weren't as many tensions there. Maybe they got along just fine. I mean, no one can really know exactly what the team environment is because we're not there. We don't see what happens day to day. But there definitely seemed to at least be some signs that not all was well. And of course, we could see from the matches they were playing that the performances weren't going so hot. And so eventually we did see that change. Fra was moved to a substitute position not so long ago, and Whitmer was brought on board as a trial member where he's had some hit or miss games. Some games he's looked quite good, some games not so much. But in general, the team's been in disarray, so it's really hard to judge individual performances so much on this team with so much chaos going on behind closed doors, it seems. Because from what we can gather, Roca doesn't want to be a part of the team, and one can only guess how long that's been going on. And obviously, if you have someone on the team that doesn't want to be there, that can cause a lot of problems with the team environment. It can make things quite difficult when you have someone who doesn't really want to play, so probably practice is pretty poor, I would imagine. Even trying to play matches is probably a nightmare whenever you have someone that doesn't really even want to be there. And from what I understand, they don't have a choice but to use Roca, because if they don't, I think the team would get marked dead because they don't have enough starting members from when the team's origins or from the team last season present anymore, because it's just Roca and Sanctuary to returning members. So I suppose if there's probably a rule in place there where, if they decide to not use Roca and only one returning coL member from the past is starting, then it would maybe mark their team as dead and actually disqualify them, which of course they're not in playoff contention or anything like that, but they have to at least keep the team alive. That way they can play likely in relegation matches, see if they can keep their Pro League spot for next season. And so that means they're kind of forced to use Roca to end out the season. So I can only imagine that creates an issue. And I also know there might be some resentment there, because I'm pretty sure there were some offers for Roca in the past, but we had Jason Lake come out and very boldly claim that he wasn't going to give up Roca, that he wanted to build the team around Roca, that he knew Roca was a talented player, and he wanted to try to see if he couldn't build a contending team around him. And so obviously, he didn't want to give him up. And it's understandable. You have a guy on contract. He's talented. You want to keep him on board because you know that he's a good player. And you want to see if you can't get a few more pieces together to make yourself an actually good team. But definitely there seems to be some issue there, right? When you have a guy that doesn't want to play with the team anymore, wants to go elsewhere. So that definitely causes problems. The whole situation with Fraud certainly didn't pan out. That was a gamble that didn't really work. So you've had a lot of turmoil with this team when it comes to their lineup, which is certainly, I would assume, certainly has made things difficult for them to actually function properly. And so while their results are bad and some of the players' stats haven't been so good when it comes to their performances, maybe you have to take it a little bit with a grain of salt, just because of how chaotic things have been with this team. And it seems like things are even more dice rolls are being made to try to save this team. Obviously, this team, I believe, stated that they had an E-League spot. They obviously want to keep their Pro League spot for ESL Pro League, which is a pretty big league to be a part of. And I'm sure they want to be maybe involved in this big Face It Pro League as well. So there's a lot to play for. There's a lot to be getting yourself prepared for, here soon in CSGO for the rest of this year. And so people are scrambling to try to get their rosters finalized. That way that they can put themselves in the best position possible to be competing for these big prize pools. And you can see Complexity just seems to be scrambling at this point by bringing in players that no one's really ever heard of. For this situation with Surreal, from what I understand, is a lot of players didn't know who this guy was when he got signed, and apparently they only had played maybe a couple of scrimmages with him before he was signed to the team as a full-fledged member today when I'm making this video. So that causes for some concern when you have people who don't even know who they're playing with, and maybe they haven't even gotten a proper tryout because they've barely played before he's been signed. And I mean, to some degree, you can somewhat understand why there's scrambling going on. There's probably not that many available options for complexity as far as talent within North America. A lot of the people that you would want are locked up in teams that are bigger orgs than complexity is in CS. I mean, that's the thing. Complexity is not the big org in North American CS anymore, as far as the power that they have or the buying power that they have. Obviously the familiar faces are still there, and Complexity is a brand that people recognize, and it's definitely a respected one. But you got orgs that are just bigger fish in the sea at this point when it comes to the pecking order of North America. Teams like CLG, like Liquid, like some of these other organizations out there, Optic. These are teams that have a little bit more influence at the top of the NA nowadays, and they're much more likely to be able to pick up big name players than Complexity is at this point, just because right now they're one of the lower ranked NA teams in league play, and that obviously doesn't make you look very attractive unless you got big dollars to spend and people are willing to go play on a lower team for big money. And with contracts the way they are now, it's also hard to pick up players whenever they have expensive buyouts. So I'm not going to pretend like I'm some type of expert on contracts and who has what funds and who cost how much, but it definitely seems like choices are somewhat limited these days, especially for teams who aren't at the very top of the scene. And so you can understand why they do have to take some gambles. But it seems like it's just been dice roll after dice roll from Complexity. Nothing's really panned out. And now they have to roll the dice again here on a player, Surreal, that no one really knows a whole lot about. Not even his own team knows much about him as he's coming on board. So it's definitely a dire straight situation for Complexity. It's hard to know what will happen with them now. Obviously, things have not worked out thus far. There still is some talent in this team. I think Sanks has shown that he can put up some numbers. Whitmer, maybe he'll pan out to be a good player. Shinobi showed some signs of being a good in-game leader back when he first joined the team. They had that big upset win against Liquid on Cash to start off ESL Pro League, and the team looked very well run in that game. They seemed to have a good slower play strategy, but they mixed in some good executes. They seemed to have players in good spots. It looked pretty good, but as time has drug on, Complexity has seemed to fall more and more apart. And I'm not sure that's just because the pressure has gotten to Shinobi and he's struggling to lead. I'm not sure if there's clashing between him and Warden on how the team should be run, if there's clashing on direction, or if someone's calling over the other when the other is supposed to be calling, and if there's some type of issue with the dynamic between those two that could be causing problems. That certainly could be the case. That certainly could be something to think about, if that might be why things aren't going right, because there's some type of clash there between the two minds of the team, so to speak, or if maybe just the struggling team environment that Complexity has with people not wanting to be there anymore, and maybe they've been wanting to leave for a while now, and so that's caused problems. You're bringing in people that people aren't familiar with. I mean, I don't know. There's all kinds of factors that seem to have been playing against Complexity for the last few months. Things just are at an all-time low right now for them, and they're trying to find a way to get out of it. And so it's definitely a very, very peculiar situation, definitely one that is quite complicated, I feel like. And so it's very hard to know too much without having, more insight onto the team. And so I'll just kind of leave it at that. So the next piece of this is what happens with Roca now. And so it's already been announced at the same time of this roster announcement with Surreal for Complexity that Roca would be on his way out. He would be playing out ESA season. He would be a substitute player until they can find a home for him. But it was announced today that he would be standing in for TCK for Echo Fox in their play in this, qualifying stage maybe, or one of the very early stages at least of this new Faceit $3.5 million partnered league with Twitch. And he'd be playing with TCK. I think Frost announced this on Twitter. Also, Richard Lewis had been saying some things yesterday, the day before this video, the day before these announcements, that there was definitely some interest from both parties between Roca and Echo Fox, which I know that Roca was an option for some other teams maybe a month or so ago, but Lake didn't want to give up Roca at that time. And so those offers are, of course, now gone, I would assume, or they're a lot more difficult to do. And so Echo Fox seems to be the next option for him, and maybe one of his only options. I'm not really sure. I'm sure Echo Fox would love to have him. He's a talented player. And if we're honest, Echo Fox is a team that does lack a bit for firepower. From what we can tell from watching some of their results whenever they have actually competed against pro teams. Again, it's very hard to judge Echo Fox because they've been sitting in Premier League for ESEA. And of course, there are some pretty good teams in there, like Tempo Storms in that league. I think they're number one in that league. You got this Obey Alliance team that has looked pretty good at the minor and has some players that seem to be pretty good. But otherwise, we don't get to see them playing against the top pro teams, except for actually this Face It thing is one of the few things we've been able to see them play top teams in, except for maybe some of the LAN qualifiers. But I don't even think they played in the DreamHack Malmo ones. I think that they didn't get the schedule, in time to have their players ready for it, so they didn't even play in that. So there's very slim pickings on being able to see Echo Fox play against some of the teams that compete in the pro leagues in North America. So that makes them even harder to judge. But just from looking at the lineup, I made a video that I'll link below as well when they first formed the team, that it just felt like they had too many support players on the same team. I mean, you had TCK, who was always kind of known of more of a supportive, even lurk-type player when he played for teams like Quantic and stuff, and he took a huge break in competitive play. I mean, he hadn't played since the Quantic days almost, I think. Maybe he played a little bit with that Torque lineup with Steel at like the very end of 2014 for a very short time before all the bans happened. That team kind of fizzled away because of the bans. And then since then, so I would assume that's maybe January 2015, short of maybe playing a little bit with I think it's called Aviato, which is a team with Mo and Frost that compete in the ESEA Premier. I think maybe he played a few games with them then, but he hasn't seriously competed in CSGO for a very long time either, so he's a bit rusty, but he's a support player, right? And then you have this A2Z guy, which, memes aside, jokes aside, is not a player that's ever really played a whole lot of top-level CSGO either in the professional leagues, and he's never really seemed like a big entry fragger to me either. So he seems like he'd be more of a supportive guy. And they have Rix, who's an entry fragger, who is a guy who looked pretty good when he was playing with teams like Tempo Storm and even on Conquest before he got removed later on to bring in Stanislaw. He played pretty good at this one particular CEVO LAN with Tempo Storm where they had played a couple of teams really close. I think they actually I think they beat a couple of good NA teams, and then they took a map off of Navi in a decider match in group play. And in general, they just surprised a lot of people because of the result at that tournament. And he looked good then, but since he's been on this team, he hasn't looked as good. But he is a guy that maybe could be an entry fragger for this team if he is able to, listen to Sean Gares and fit into a system there. I'm not sure if enough time has passed for that to have worked itself out. I'm not really sure. And then when you have Mo, you have an Opper who is pretty good, but he's usually much better on LAN than he is online. It seems to have been his track record in CSGO, and I've watched him play with teams way back in the day, like Frost Gaming, or when he stood in for Liquid. Of course, he looked really good at that Season 2 ESEA Pro League when he I think it was against Envious on Cobblestone or something like that in group play, where he actually looked quite good, and that was at the very end of last year. So he's had his moments where he's looked pretty good on LAN with an op to be fragging pretty well, but his online play hasn't been as good as that, and in some games he's looked quite off. So maybe there is a little bit of firepower there with Mo if he can actually get to the LAN stage, which of course E-League will be entirely on LAN, so maybe that won't be so much of a problem. And you have a very good in-game leader in Sean Gares who can lead the team. Obviously we know that he has a reputation of being a great in-game leader, a great strat caller, one who is able to, really scout his opponents very well, do his research, come up with, good counter strats. But aside from that, he also is able to build a system, a good default system or some good executes that he can run in multiple situations, not just against a particular opponent that he has scouted. So we know that he can be kind of a mastermind type guy. So they have that going for them as well. But the problem is Sean Gares has been out fragging most of the guys on the team that are supposed to be like your entry, second entry, closeout type players. They're supposed to be, really making sure that you're opening up bomb sites or that you're really holding things down or are cleaning rounds up. So I mean, that's kind of an issue. No offense against Sean Gares, but he shouldn't have to be the one putting up some of the best numbers on the team. It should be that they have a little bit more firepower there to help open up bomb sites and do some of these other things that I've mentioned. And so, they don't really have, to me, a true secondary entry fragger, a guy that can follow up Rix and be able to capitalize on Rix going in first or what have you. If that's what Rix is going to do, if he's going to be an entry-type fragger for this team, which I think would make sense because that's kind of what he did when he was playing his best CS, when he was playing on teams like Tempo Storm and such. So, yeah, I think Roca could be that guy. I mean, he's been more of a peripheral role player, a very aggro peripheral role player when he played with Elevate and even a lot of his time on Complexity. That's the kind of TCK plays a peripheral role, so I'm not sure if he's going to be like a direct replacement. You're still going to be using like Mo and Rix and A2Z and Sean more to open up sites and let Roca kind of play a solo role if they're going to try to, put Roca and Rix together as some type of entry duo, and keep Sean playing like a perimeter role, maybe have A2Z play the other, and Mo like floating around the op. I'm not sure what type of system they'll want to build, or this is even a permanent thing. They said they're just having him stand in and try out, so I'm not sure if it'll actually pan out that he will eventually join full time. But yeah, I think for Echo Fox, Roca is going to be a good pickup. I think he can add a little bit of firepower to the team, something that I think they are lacking in a bit. And I think it could be beneficial for Echo Fox. As far as Roca joining Echo Fox, is it going to be a better situation than Complexity? Well, Complexity situation's been pretty rough. So I think it very well could be, but I think he might be a little bit salty that he missed out on some bigger opportunities he could have had a couple of months ago had he been able to be involved in some of this roster shuffling we saw at some of the teams at the top of the scene. But rightly so, Complexity wanted to hold on to him because they had him on contract, and you can't blame him for that either. So it'll be interesting to see how this all plays out. This is, of course, all really initial reactions. We haven't seen Roca play with Echo Fox yet. We haven't seen Echo Fox play a lot of pro-level play yet. So a little bit of a harder situation to read when it comes to that end. For Complexity's end, definitely they needed some type of change because things weren't going well. Whether or not the changes they made will be the right ones is difficult to assess, since a player like Surreal is just not one I know a whole heck of a lot about, and he's not one that's played a lot of top professional CS. So it's hard to really read the situation, but it certainly seems quite a chaotic type of deal over there, and we'll just have to see how it plays out. But I just want to get some initial reactions and a little bit of thoughts about what was going on with Complexity and Roca. So yeah, if you enjoyed the video, please follow and subscribe for more. Thanks a lot.